Hi Year 12 and welcome to this video. We're going to talk about how to study for HSC Advanced Mathematics. So this is what I'm going to cover. Having a look at what your goal is, the syllabus, analysing your strengths and weaknesses, looking at summarising, tutoring, and then finally the exam. So what is your goal? If you're in Year 12 at the moment, you should have an idea of what you're aiming for. You might be going for one of the highest bands, like band 5 or 6. Now, I always say the HSC is pretty much 80% routine type questions that could be hidden, they could be disguised and you have to do a little bit of hunting, but you will have seen them before. The other 20% are more problem-solving questions, and you have to figure out how to use your knowledge to be able to apply that to a question that you haven't seen before. So if you're going for the highest band, then 80% you're going to have to be efficient and accurate. So working on those routine type questions and making sure you're always getting them correct, and then practicing your problem solving skills. If you're going for a middle band like a 3 or a 4, you need to focus on that 80%. So being efficient and accurate and getting the stuff right each time. And if you're just trying to pass, like if you're going for band 2 or 3, then you want to practice what you can do, and some stuff you'll actually let go, you'll ignore it. So you won't spend a whole lot of time trying to learn something that might only give you 2 marks in an exam. Practice the things that you're good at. So have a think about what your goal is. Now, to help you with your goal, here's some data from last year's HSC. So whilst we don't know the raw cutoffs for each of the bands, we do know the percentage of students that get in each of the bands. So here we have 23% of students last year scored in band 6, so that's from 90 to 100. 29% were in band 5, 28% were in band 4, 15% were in band 3, and 3% were in band 2. Now all of those numbers actually add up to 98%, so 2% of students scored in band 1 between 0 and 49%. So if you are a reasonable mathematics student, you can almost certainly score above 50% and probably will be above 60%. That's what the data is telling us. So that should help you with setting your goal. Let's move on to the syllabus. Do you have a copy of the syllabus? If you don't, get one. There's one on my website. I've just put out the dot points of the entire syllabus. You're welcome to use it. There's a link below this video. Go through it. Have you learnt everything? Are there any gaps in your knowledge? Then I want you to analyse your strengths and weaknesses. So this is what the advanced math syllabus looks like that I have on the website. And I've got Year 11 as well as Year 12, because remember, about 30% of Year 11 can be examined. Now this is how we analyse our strengths and weaknesses. We use a 4-point system. 1 means I know what this is, I've heard of it, so I obviously was in class. You might not know anything more than that. If you've never heard of it, you don't put anything there, you don't tick anything. In fact, highlight that and go and see your teacher and say, I don't know this. Number 2 is, I can do those routine questions. They're the questions that they're just straightforward, straight into the formula, nothing tricky about them. 3 is, I can do the harder hidden, so that's where you've got to go hunting for the information, or head type questions. They're the problem solving type questions. So you can tick 3 if you feel that you can do that. And then 4 is you could teach someone else, that's wisdom. So I'm going to pretend that I'm a Year 12 student and I'm going through this list. Uses index laws and surds. I'm going to give myself a 2 for that. I'm pretty good at index laws. I'm not great at surds. I'm going to put that over there. Solves quadratic equations using the quadratic formula and completing the square. Again, pretty good at quadratic formula, not so good at completing the square. Manipulates complex algebraic expressions involving algebraic fractions. No, I'm terrible at that. Understands that functions and relations are mappings between sets or a rule or a formula. Yep, I get that. That's pretty good. Uses function notation, domain and range, independent and dependent variables. I'm not too bad at most of that. Domain and range I'm a bit rusty at. Let's give it a 2. Graph of a function, I'm good. Identifies types of functions and relations. Actually, I'm really good at that. Defines odd and even. No, I hate that stuff. Defines the sum, difference, product, quotient of functions and their domain and range. No. Defines and uses the composite function. Not too bad. Recognizes that solving the equation f of x equals 0 means finding the x-intercepts. Yep, I get that. And so you can just go through and give a judgment about what you know. You can use that column for notes to write anything that you want to clarify. So how do we study for maths? The age-old question. Well, once you know your strengths and weaknesses, set up a study timetable and then divide your time between these different things. We can write summaries or flashcards, relearn stuff, particularly your weaknesses. Look at revision questions, practice past papers, practice weak areas or particular types of questions like multiple choice, and don't study for more than 2 hours at a time. When it comes to writing summaries, there are lots of different types. Some people like pictures, like me. Some people like to cover their bedroom wall with all of their summaries. Some people like to do dot points and in list form. Some people like to do post-it notes. You have to find what works for you. But one thing is clear from research is that handwritten is best because what you write, you tend to remember better. This is what I like to do, is grab a 48-page exercise book and do one double page per topic. So here you can see non-right angled trigonometry. I've got a mixture of formulas and diagrams and examples. And you can add to your summaries as you go along. If you run out of space, just put some post-it notes on top with the extra ideas that you come across. Let's have a little chat about tuition and tutoring. It's tempting just to get tutoring prior to a major exam, but it can be counterproductive. And the main reason is because the tutor is doing all the thinking instead of you. The best way to learn is to think about your learning, to analyze your strengths and weaknesses, and then to act upon it. So if you do spot a weakness, then you can get some help through a tutor if you want to, or your teacher, or through YouTube videos. Your peers are also a great resource because they know things that you don't know, and you know things that they don't know. So set up a regular study session and bring along questions to go through together. Test one another. It's probably good if you find people who have a similar goal to you. Now there are several ways to practice past papers. You can do a particular section type or topics or question types like multiple choice. You can do timed practice, and that can be either with help, so with your summaries or open book, or under exam conditions, and you should try all of these. Now I mentioned practicing multiple choice because this is a really good skill to have. The answers to multiple choice questions are not random. In fact, they've been designed to include the most common mistakes made by students. I'm sure your teacher has told you that. Have a look at this question. What is the derivative of e to the x squared? Now hopefully you know that the answer is e to the x squared multiplied by 2x. Have a look at the other options. Let's have a look at where they come from. This one in particular. This one is for the student who thinks that we use the power rule. So I'm going to bring down the x squared and then go e to the x squared take away 1. Okay, so that one's obviously wrong. Here we've got a partial chain rule. We've got the 2x out the front, but they've also differentiated the x squared on the power. This one's the correct answer. This one here, all they've done is brought the 2 down, and then they've thought, well, e to the x squared stays the same. So you can see sort of validation for every single one of those answers. And if you're not strong at this, you can be easily trapped by one of those 3. Here's the thing, you should be able to eliminate 1 or 2 of the answers if you're not strong at a particular question. That one's standing out as being quite ludicrous. And so is this one. And that brings us down to 2, 50-50 chance. Now there are websites where you can practice multiple choice questions from the HSC. NESA used to have it on their website where you could just say, please choose a number of questions, 20 questions, and it would do a little self-test for you. But I know that there are other sites. If you want to put into the chat below sites that you use, that could be really useful. So hopefully by now you've had some exposure to practice exams in the trial and the half yearly, and you know the layout. If we look at the 2020 HSC Maths Advanced paper, are there different sections? Yes, there are. Section 1 is multiple choice. Section 2 is short and long answer. How many questions are there? It varies. There are always 10 multiple choice, but when we get to section 2, the number of questions can vary, but they all add up to 90 marks. What type of questions are there? So we've got multiple choice. Then in section 2, it's graded, so it starts with easier questions and then heads up to more difficult questions. How do I answer the different questions? In the multiple choice, you don't have to show any working. In section 2, you should show your working. You should also be familiar with the reference sheet. Now, the reference sheet for advanced maths is 4 pages long, but it also includes extension 1 and extension 2 material. And you need to be aware of what you need and what you should ignore. You are given measurement formulas, functions, trigonometry, finance and statistics, logs and exponentials, derivatives, integrals, probability, and random variables. And know how to use your calculator. So here's some common issues with the calculator. Using radians instead of degrees with trigonometry. Not knowing how to use your stats operations. Rounding too early, so make sure you know how to use this answer button. Also know how to use your degrees, minutes, seconds button for time as well as angles. And know how to reset, and that's Shift 9 3 on this calculator. Now I mentioned before that roughly 30% of Year 11 content can be examined. We've only got 2 papers that we can look at. We have the sample paper and then the 2020 exam. But look, over 30% of Year 11 was examined. Have a look at some of the other areas with high proportions, working with functions. Have a look at calculus down here, 7 and 13 and 13, 33%, and similar in the sample paper. Quite a bit on random variables and also modelling financial situations. So you might want to take this into consideration when you're choosing where to focus your energies for your revision. Now let's turn our attention to the exam. You get 10 minutes reading time. And use this time wisely. It seems like a lot of time, but it's not. It'll go very quickly. So during this time, make sure you read through the questions carefully. A number of the questions in the HSC have got a high literacy component, so this is your time to decode those questions. Look for any tricks and make a plan. Where are you going to start? What do you want to write down the minute that you're allowed to pick up that pen? And then the examiner will say, you may start. Now, the most important advice I can give you is to stay calm. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but use some mindfulness techniques to calm your breathing and stay focused on what you've got to do. If you can stay calm, you can get out the knowledge that you've spent 2 years learning. What's your approach? Is it sequential? So you're going to start at the beginning, work through the multiple choice and all the way through. Are you going to choose your favourite topics first? Are you going to do the stuff that you'll forget first? Don't get stuck on a question. So if you are a sequential worker, don't get stuck on question 23 and not move on until you've done it. Leave it and come back. Keep an eye on the time. So it gives you a guideline as to where you are, how much time you should spend on each section. So make sure that you've got that mapped out. And check your work. Don't sit idle at the end of an exam. If you've got half an hour left, go and do the multiple choice again. Go and pick some questions that you thought were easy and look for silly mistakes. Now, it's good exam technique to always show working out for questions worth 2 or more marks. If you make a silly mistake, then they can follow through from your error and give you part marks. Now, some students say to me, well, I don't know what to write down. Well, if you've used your calculator to get your answer, then write down what you typed into the calculator. That's working out. Another tip, think about what the marks might be allocated for. If the question says, find x and justify your answer, that's 2 things. Tell them what x is and tell them why you know that. Now, if we get to a question that we can't do, we can do some damage control. So questions, many questions in the HSC are scaffolded, which means that they step you through them. So find the bits you can do. You don't have to do every part. There'll often be a show that question, which means if you can't do part 1, you've still got a chance of doing part 2 or part 3. And here's a tip. Remember follow-through marks. So suppose we get to part 2 and we can't do this. We can't find the perpendicular distance from B to C, so that's that distance there. Make it up. Okay, I know it says not to scale, but just figure something out. I reckon that might be maybe 3, maybe 2. So put an answer down for part 2. You're going to get that wrong, but then you can use that answer in part 3 to get part 3 correct. I mentioned before that many questions in the HSC have quite high literacy demands, and this question here from 2020 was really hammered by the critics, and rightly so. Look how dense that language is. So remember the problem-solving technique. Highlight relevant information. You would have learnt that in primary school. So we read through this. A cricket is an insect. Yeah, we don't care. The male cricket produces a chirping sound. I don't really care about that either. A scientist wants to explore the relationship between the temperature in degrees Celsius and the number of cricket chirps heard in a 15-second time interval. Now, I know that you don't have a highlighter, and more's the pity in your reading time, but you should be mentally highlighting this. As soon as you're allowed to pick up a pen, you can go and highlight the whole paper if you want to. Once a day for 20 days, the scientist collects data. Based on the 20 data points, they draw this box plot. The mean temperature is 0.525 degrees below the median temperature, and a total of 684 chirps was counted. It's when we get down to here, actually, we figure out what the question's actually all about. Fits a least squares regression line. So this is bivariate data. So when you're reading through that in your reading time, you get down to then you think, okay, I do know what this is about, and you start to make a plan for how you might be able to answer the question. Now here's a couple of tips. Answers to some types of questions, like simultaneous equations, tend to be whole numbers or nice numbers. So if you get a decimal, it's worthwhile checking again. Here's an actual script of a student. Now, if I got down here to 1.8, I would have thought, that doesn't seem right. I might have another go at it. Even if you're getting all the way down to here, and you put 1.8 and 0.4 up into that second equation, it doesn't equal 0. So they actually are incorrect. Back to my earlier point, though, about showing working out, they are probably going to get 2 marks out of 3 there, because there must be an error somewhere in here, but then everything after that is correct. And have a look at this script. What do you think's going on here? What do you think the question was? Probably said it was an AP, an arithmetic progression. You're right. So the first 3 terms of an arithmetic series, find the 60th term, hence or otherwise find the sum of the first 60 terms in the series. Now I said be smart, and by that I mean make sure you know how to do that question in an efficient manner. But what that student's actually done is pretty smart. If you've gone into a paper where you don't have a lot of things that you can cover and you're sitting there doing nothing for 2 hours, that's a pretty good use of your time, because they actually got that right. And finishing off with some problem-solving techniques. So don't forget these. Draw a diagram, make a list or a table, work backwards, find a pattern, look for a simpler case, guess and check. So what would we use for this question? A ball is dropped from a height of 2 meters onto a hard floor and bounces. After each bounce, the maximum height reached by the ball is 75% of the previous maximum height. After it hits the floor, it reaches a height of 1.5 meters before falling again, and after the second bounce, it reaches a height of 1.125, etc. We would draw a diagram, wouldn't we? And those students who drew a diagram had a better chance of getting it right, because they can probably see that in our series we have got these down parts, and we've got another series going up. So a number of students would have just done only the down parts and added those. So draw a diagram. And lastly, this one. I put this one in on purpose to show you how you can use the multiple choice answers to help you with the question. So the point R is the midpoint of PQ. P has coordinates 5, 3. What are the coordinates of Q? Now, if we were doing this question without these answers, we would let Q be x, y, and we would set up 2 equations. X plus 5 all over 2 equals 9, and y plus 3 all over 2 is equal to 5. But we don't have to do that. Have a look at these two. 4, 7. Well, that can't possibly be the answer. 7, 4. Well, that's sitting in there. That can't be right either. 13, 7 and 14, 8. Yes, it could be one of those. So let's use the answer. We're going to guess and check and see if this is right. 13 and 5 is 18, divided by 2 is 9. It's actually C. And that's it. I'll finish off with what my dear old dad used to tell me. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. You spent 2 years of your life on this thing. So finish it off well and do it proud.